She fled violence to protect her son. But when crossing the border in search of salvation, she found herself in an even greater hell. Laura thought she had overcome the most difficult journey until she watched them tear her son from her arms. Months of separation, pain and desperation, and their reunion in the courtroom made even the judge cry. Laura woke that morning to the sound of gunshots in the distance. It wasn't the first time, but this time was different. Her son Miguel, barely 8 years old, trembled in her arms without saying a word. News traveled fast in Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas. The cartel had left a clear threat at the elementary school where he studied. The message, painted in blood on the back wall of the schoolyard, read, "If you don't pay, the children will pay." It was then that Laura knew time had run out. Her life had never been easy, but until that point, she had managed to keep Miguel safe. Her husband had been murdered 3 years ago in broad daylight for refusing to cooperate with local drug traffickers. Since then, Laura lived in a constant state of alert, like a wild animal trying to protect her cub. She changed houses, jobs, even names, but they always found her. And now, the threat was direct. Miguel was on the list. If you like interesting stories, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our content. And tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. We'd love to hear from you. That night, Laura couldn't sleep. While her son slept on the worn mattress they shared, she counted the few coins she had in a jar hidden inside the old oven in her kitchen. It wasn't even enough for a bus ticket to Monterrey, but fleeing was no longer an option. It was a necessity. The next day, she sold her refrigerator, her cell phone, even Miguel's bicycle. Anything they couldn't carry on their backs became money for the escape. She asked her trusted neighbor to burn all documents with their names. They couldn't leave a trace. She knew crossing the border was dangerous, that she had no visa or passport for her son, but staying meant accepting a death sentence. Before leaving, she took Miguel to the cemetery where the boy's father was buried. He didn't understand why they were visiting the grave at that time of day. Laura, with moist eyes, crouched in front of the unnamed headstone and whispered, "Take care of him because I don't know if I'll be able to." The route to the border was a labyrinth of nerves. First, they took a bus to Piedras Negras. Then they met someone who knew someone who charged them an exorbitant amount just to cross them through the river. Laura didn't ask anything. She knew that on those roads, the less you asked, the more chances you had of surviving. Each night, they slept in different places, an abandoned house, the back of a truck, a church. Miguel didn't complain. It was as if he too understood, in his little heart, that his mother was fighting against something bigger than both of them. On the third day of travel, Laura received a call from her sister, who was still in Tamaulipas. Her voice was choppy, but she managed to say, "They came to your house. They asked for Miguel. They're looking for him." Laura felt as if her soul was being ripped from her body. There was no turning back. When they reached Sonoita, they met a man who called himself El Gato, the cat. He promised to take them across the Arizona desert in exchange for almost everything Laura had. She accepted without hesitation. It wasn't a decision. It was a desperate mother. Before crossing, she gave Miguel a small stuffed animal that she had managed to hide at the bottom of her backpack. It was the only object left from his childhood. She put it in his hands and told him, "If something happens, if we get separated, you hold it tight and think of me. I will find you, no matter what." Miguel nodded silently. Laura noticed that his eyes no longer sparkled like before. He had seen and felt too much for his age. That night, at the foot of the desert, with the wind whipping their skin like blades and the silence heavy with fear, Laura hugged her son tightly. "Tomorrow we cross," she told him in a low voice, "and we're not looking back." She didn't know what awaited them. She thought the worst was behind them, that hell was in Mexico and hope was on the other side. But she was about to discover that sometimes the boundaries between hell and salvation blur, and that the price of fleeing death could be losing everything you love. The sun hadn't yet risen when El Gato ordered them to get ready. Laura tightly gripped Miguel's hand as she observed the other people in the group, a young couple with a 6-year-old girl, an elderly man who could barely walk properly, 2 teenagers who didn't look at each other, and a pregnant woman who was breathing with difficulty. They all carried the same expression: fear, exhaustion, desperation. "You're going to walk for 4 days, El Gato said in a low voice, without any emotion, like someone giving a recipe. "Don't fall behind. Don't talk. Don't cry. And if someone falls, we keep going." Miguel trembled, but said nothing. His mother had promised him that everything would be fine soon. But now, standing in front of that infinite desert, Laura began to question whether they would make it out alive. The first day was bearable. The sun was just rising when they started walking, and the sand wasn't burning yet. Laura held Miguel's hand, offering him small sips of water every hour as they had been instructed. No one spoke. You could only hear the creaking of backpacks, slow steps on the dry earth, and occasionally a muffled sob. At noon, the heat was already unbearable. The pregnant woman vomited frequently. The elderly man stumbled several times. Miguel began to bleed from his nose. Laura placed her own wet handkerchief on his forehead and continued walking, repeating a phrase in her head like a prayer. "It's for his life. It's for his life." That night, they hid under a dry bush. They ate pieces of stale bread and drank a few more drops of water. Laura couldn't sleep. She heard the sounds of the desert, insects, wind, and something else, something that seemed to walk among them. A silence so deep it hurt your ears. The second day was a test of endurance. The sun fell mercilessly on their skin, lips cracked. The blisters on Laura's feet were already open and bleeding. She saw the young couple's daughter start to faint. The father carried her in his arms while his wife cried silently. Further ahead, one of the teenagers fell to his knees. El Gato looked at him coldly and muttered, "If he doesn't get up in 5 minutes, we continue without him." Laura wanted to help him, but Miguel could barely take another step. She could feel her son drying up from the inside. It hurt to see him like this, silent, without tears, with blank eyes and dragging feet. That afternoon, El Gato stopped and told them they had to go around an area where there were patrols. That meant walking double that night. No one protested. There was no choice. Laura gritted her teeth and continued. When Miguel stumbled and fell face first in the sand, she immediately lifted him up. His knees were scraped, but the boy only said, "I'm fine, Mom." And that made her cry. Inside, because outside she couldn't lose control. At that moment, Laura felt a fierce hatred toward those who had taken away their peace, their home, their country, her son's childhood. The third day was the worst. The pregnant woman couldn't continue. She sat in the sand, panting. No one knew what to do. El Gato simply kept walking. She screamed for them not to leave her, that the baby was moving, that please they should wait. But no one stopped. No one could. Laura looked back as they moved away. The woman stayed there, alone, sunk in nothingness. Miguel didn't ask, he just lowered his head. At noon, Miguel stopped walking. He fell to the ground with his eyes closed. Laura screamed his name. She shook him. She thought he was dying. She took out the last drops of water and poured them in his mouth, then on his forehead. The boy opened his eyes with difficulty. "I'm cold," he whispered, shivering under a 104-degree sun. Laura carried him. She didn't know how, but she carried him. Her destroyed feet and exhausted arms didn't matter. She carried him like that, pressed against her chest, with her heart overflowing with fear. "Don't die, son. Don't die," she whispered over and over. "We're almost there." Night fell like a heavy blanket. Only 7 people remained from the original group. Everyone looked like ghosts. Laura could barely see with her eyes swollen from the sun and tears. Her body begged her to give up, but every time she felt like she was going to fall, she remembered the narco's words painted on the school wall, and she held her son tighter. On the 4th day, when they spotted a road in the distance, El Gato stopped. He pointed towards some lights on the horizon. "There's the patrol. If you want to surrender, it's now. If not, I'm going back." And without saying more, he disappeared among the bushes. Laura fell to her knees. Miguel was breathing with difficulty, but was still conscious. She had no doubts. She wanted to live. She hadn't done all this to die there. She walked toward the lights with the last threads of strength she had left, with her son in her arms, with hope tattooed on her soul. But what she didn't know was that by crossing that imaginary line of earth, the worst was yet to come. What seemed to be the end of suffering was just the beginning of another hell. Laura could barely stand when she finally saw, in the distance, the lights of a road in US territory. The air burned in her lungs, and her legs trembled with each step. She carried Miguel hanging on her back, wrapped in a thin blanket that no longer protected from the night cold. She felt him light, too light, as if the child's weight had been replaced by a handful of bones. His breathing was weak. She knew they couldn't continue anymore. They approached an area where they knew border patrols passed. Laura had heard it from other migrants in Sonoita. If you surrendered voluntarily, at least they gave you the chance to request asylum. Even with all the terrible stories she had heard, she still believed that the United States was a country of laws, of justice, of hope. A white vehicle with a green stripe appeared on the horizon. Laura raised a hand with difficulty, staggering, with the other securing Miguel against her chest. When the patrol stopped, 2 agents got out, burly men, stern-faced, armed. One of them pointed a flashlight directly at her eyes. Laura closed hers reflexively. "Hands up, don't move!" shouted the agent. "I don't speak English," Laura said with a broken voice. "I request asylum, political asylum, please." One of the agents frowned and approached. He spoke to her in harsh Spanish, learned in training. "Do you have papers, identification? Why did you cross illegally?" Laura could barely answer. "My son, he's sick. We're fleeing Mexico. The cartel, please, we need help." The agent lowered his voice a little, looking at the child. "How old is he?" "8, whispered Laura, caressing Miguel's sweaty and pale face. The agents made a radio call. In less than 10 minutes, another patrol arrived. This time there were 3 more agents, 2 men and a woman. They ordered them to get in the vehicle without further explanation. Laura obeyed. The truck was cold as a freezer. Miguel trembled. Laura held him with all her strength. "It's okay, my love. We're safe now," she whispered, though she didn't know if it was true. Upon arriving at the processing center, they were separated by a metal door that closed behind them. The room was illuminated by white fluorescent lights that gave a clinical, inhuman feeling. There was a strong smell of disinfectant and dry sweat. People sitting on the floor, children wrapped in aluminum thermal blankets, women hugging sleeping babies. Laura was told to sit on a steel bench. An agent took information while another observed her with a tablet in hand. They asked her everything: full name, country of origin, who she was running from, if she had family in the United States. She answered everything. She omitted nothing. She pronounced each word as if she were begging for her life. Miguel clung to her, resting his head on her lap. When the interview finally ended, a uniformed woman with an expressionless face and monotone voice approached with a form in her hand. "We need to do a medical evaluation of your son. He's going to go with us for a few minutes." "No," Laura said immediately. "He's fine. I'll take care of him. It's mandatory, part of the entry protocol. Please don't separate him from me. We just crossed the desert. He's weak. He just wants to be with me. I'll take care of him." "Ma'am, you have no choice. Cooperate." A second agent approached. Laura stood up, putting herself in front of Miguel. The boy began to cry, nervous. "I don't want to go, Mom. I don't want to." "I don't want you to go either, my love," Laura shouted, hugging him. "Please, we just want to be together." Within seconds, 2 more agents arrived. They held her by the arms. Laura screamed, kicked, resisted like a wounded animal. Miguel shrieked, trying to break free from the hands pulling him from his mother's lap. "Mommy!" "Mommy! My son! My son! Where are you taking him? Where?" But it was too late. The door slammed shut. The echo of Miguel's scream hung in the air like a dagger stuck in Laura's chest. They released her. She fell to the floor, crying without air. The assistant who had interviewed her earlier showed no emotion. She just wrote something on a sheet. A Salvadoran woman who was in the cell across said from the corner, "They took mine 3 days ago. I don't know where my boy is either." Laura, without strength, lifted her head. "Yours too? And they don't tell you anything?" "Nothing. They don't explain anything. They say it's to protect them, but nobody knows anything. They just disappear." Hours passed, maybe days. Laura had no watch. They gave her no news. No one told her where her son was or when she would see him again. They gave her cold food, a silver blanket, and kept her locked up with other women, all in the same situation. Sometimes one cried all night. Sometimes another stayed silent, as if she were no longer alive. An agent handed her a new form. "Sign here," he told her in dragged Spanish. "It's to process your entry." Laura hesitated. "Is this for requesting asylum? Will this help me see my son?" The agent didn't answer. He just repeated, "Sign here." Without a lawyer, without a translator, without fully understanding, she signed. She didn't know that by doing so, she was giving up her legal right to fight to stay. That night, Laura felt like she was dying inside. Not from the cold, not from hunger, but from the absence. Miguel, her entire life, was somewhere unknown, and nobody, absolutely nobody, seemed willing to return him to her. Laura lost track of time. She didn't know if it was Tuesday or Sunday, if it was 2 in the morning or noon. In that freezing cell, without windows and with lights that never turned off, time became constant torture. She ate when they brought food. She slept when her body shut down. And she thought all the time about Miguel. Her son's screams remained alive in her memory, like an echo that repeated over and over, "Mommy, Mommy!" That cry wasn't just any cry. It was a tearing. It was pure fear. And she hadn't been able to do anything. No one told her where he was. No one told her when she would see him again. When she asked, the guards barely looked at her. "He's being evaluated, Mom. It's for his safety," they said without conviction. One early morning, while other women slept on the concrete floor, a young agent approached. She had a tired face, swollen eyes, and a marked southern accent. "Your son was transferred to a temporary shelter," she said in a low voice, almost without looking at her. "He's in another state." Laura sat up suddenly, her heart racing. "Which state? Is he okay? Can you tell me? Is he sick?" The agent swallowed. "I can't give more information. I'm not authorized." Please. I just want to know if he's alive. I'm his mother. You can't treat me like I don't exist." But the woman was already walking away, repeating in a low voice as if she wanted to justify herself, "I'm not allowed. I'm sorry. I'm not allowed." Laura sat back in the corner, wrapping her arms around her legs. She felt a tremor run through her body. It wasn't the cold anymore. It was fear, real fear, the kind that comes when you no longer have control over anything, not even over what's most sacred, your child. Days later, she was transferred to another detention center, larger, grayer, more impersonal. There, they forced her to sign more papers she didn't understand. They made her walk through long hallways, escorted by armed women. They gave her a beige uniform with a number stuck to her chest. She was no longer Laura, she was just another number in the system. During an interview with a new officer, she tried to ask for a lawyer. "Do you have a number for a legal representative?" he asked. "No, I'm alone. I have no one here." "Then you'll be processed according to protocol. We can't wait any longer." "And my son?" "That's not the subject of this interview," he replied dryly, without looking up from the computer. Laura left that room feeling invisible, as if her voice didn't matter, as if her story carried no weight. One morning, they called her suddenly. She thought maybe it was good news, a hearing, some news about Miguel, but it was worse. They took her to a small room with a metal table and a folder on it. A tall official with a hard face entered and sat in front of her. "I need to confirm with you that you signed these documents voluntarily," he said, showing the sheets. Laura read what little she could. She understood almost nothing. But one sentence paralyzed her. "Waiver of right to request asylum." No, I didn't know it said that. No one explained it to me. They told me it was to continue the process. I don't speak English. They didn't translate it properly. "You signed." "They deceived me. They pressured me. I just wanted to see my son." The man closed the folder, showing no emotion whatsoever. Deportation is already being processed. Laura felt the air leave her chest. "Deportation? And Miguel, are you going to deport me without my son? The minor is under state custody. These are separate processes. His case will be evaluated later." "No, that can't be. He's a child. He has no one here. He's my son. You can't do this to me," she screamed, standing, hitting the table with clenched fists. 2 agents entered and restrained her. Laura screamed, kicked, cried. She didn't care what they thought. She was losing her son, and nobody seemed to have a heart. "He's a child. He's not a paper. He's not a number. He's a child," she managed to say before they took her out. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on her bunk, trembling, looking at the wall without seeing it. She thought about her son, about his scraped knees, about how he liked to sleep with his stuffed animal in his hand, about the promise she made him before crossing. "I'll be with you always." How could she keep that promise if the system treated her as if she didn't exist? For the first time in her entire journey, Laura felt she couldn't go on, that her strength had broken, that maybe, just maybe, she would never see him again. But just when her world seemed to completely collapse, something changed. The next day, a woman gently knocked on her cell door. She was different. She wore civilian clothes, a folder in her hand, a worried expression. "Laura Contreras?" she asked. "Yes," she responded, almost voiceless. "I'm a social worker. I'm from an organization that reviews family separation cases. Someone reported your situation. We're going to help you." Laura didn't know if it was true. She didn't know if it was a dream. She just broke into tears. After weeks of darkness, a light, though dim, appeared at the end. Laura's hands trembled as she held the folder the social worker had given her. She didn't fully understand what it said, but this woman, who introduced herself as Daniela Rivas, spoke clear Spanish with a look that didn't judge or order. She was the first person since crossing the border who treated her like a human being. "We're reviewing cases of mothers separated from their children," Daniela explained. "We've already reported your situation. We're going to try to suspend your deportation, but I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning." Laura told her story without omitting anything, from the threat at Miguel's school to crossing the desert and the exact moment they tore him from her arms. She spoke with contained rage and pain that broke her voice with each phrase. When she finished, Daniela's eyes were misty. "I'm not promising it will be easy," she said. "The system is slow and cruel, but you're not alone. We're going to fight." Laura didn't dare to fully believe, but for the first time she felt a small spark ignite inside her. However, hope didn't bring immediate relief. On the contrary, what followed were confusing and agonizing weeks, where Laura found herself trapped in a maze of offices, papers, hearings, and silences. Daniela did the impossible, but the obstacles were many. There were lost forms, incomplete records, poorly translated documents. The signature Laura had placed without understanding continued to be a shadow threatening everything. "Legally, you signed your voluntary departure," they repeated to her on several occasions. "That complicates the process." But Daniela didn't give up. She got an NGO specializing in migrant rights interested in the case. A lawyer named Tomas Aguilar. young, passionate, and firm-voiced, agreed to represent Laura without charging a cent. Tomas was the one who explained the harsh reality to her. What they did to you is a violation of your rights. They separated you from your son without a court order, without a real risk assessment. They made you sign under coercion. They shouldn't have processed you without a certified translator. Laura looked at him, sitting in a windowless room at the detention center. With each phrase, she felt anger, she felt fear, but she also felt strength. She was no longer alone. Meanwhile, no one knew for certain where Miguel was. He had been transferred twice, first to Texas, then to New Mexico. The child welfare system had a maze of centers and shelters, and records of migrant minors were poorly handled, incomplete. Only after pressing with a lawsuit were they able to confirm his exact location. A children's shelter in Las Cruces, almost 1,000 kilometers from the center where Laura was detained. When she heard the name of the place, Laura couldn't contain herself. Is he okay? Did anyone see him? Does he remember me? Does he know I didn't abandon him? Tomas and Daniela exchanged glances before responding. They're taking care of him, Daniela said cautiously. But according to the shelter's report, he's withdrawn. He doesn't talk to other children. He has trouble sleeping. He draws a lot. He always draws a woman and a child. He's waiting for you, Laura. Those words were like a sweet dagger, painful but necessary. Laura's legal situation remained uncertain. Deportation was still pending. Authorities refused to acknowledge that the document she signed was invalid. Each day that passed was a battle between bureaucracy and heart. One afternoon, while waiting for a new appointment with the lawyer, a migration officer handed her an official notification. It was written in English, but Laura only needed one word to understand what it said: removal. Daniela confirmed the worst. They want to remove you from the country in 3 days. They don't care that there's an ongoing legal process. They haven't even heard your statement in a formal hearing. Laura collapsed. They can't deport me, not without my son. I can't leave without him. That night she didn't eat. She didn't sleep. She sat on the floor with her forehead against the wall, murmuring a broken prayer. It was Tomas who moved the pieces most aggressively. He called journalists, activists, associations. He managed to get a local media outlet to publish a story about Laura's case. The headline read, "Mother about to be deported without her 8-year-old son." The news went viral. Social media exploded. Within hours, the case was picked up by a national human rights organization. Calls reached Washington. The next day, a federal judge temporarily stopped the deportation. "We bought time," Tomas said. "Now we have to prepare your defense with everything." Laura didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She was exhausted, on the verge of collapse, but at least they weren't going to tear her from the country without fighting for Miguel. The lawyer organized a new hearing. This time, Laura would be heard before an immigration judge. Daniela helped her prepare her testimony. She taught her to speak firmly, to breathe deeply, to tell her story without fear. "You don't have to seem perfect, Laura," Daniela told her, taking her hand. "You just have to tell the truth. We'll do the rest." That night, Laura stayed awake writing a letter to her son. She didn't know if he would ever read it, but she needed to put it in words. "My love, I don't know how much longer until I see you again, but I haven't stopped looking for you for a single day. You are my life, and I swear, by your father and by God, that I won't give up." The hearing would be in 2 weeks, and meanwhile, Miguel, far away in Las Cruces, shrank more and more into his silence, waiting for someone, anyone, to tell him that his mom hadn't forgotten him. If you're enjoying this story, please like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on all our content. The day of the hearing approached like a runaway train. In the detention center, each hour passed with a different weight. Laura woke up early, not by order of the center, but from anxiety. She sat on her bunk, with her body tense, mentally rehearsing the words she had to say in front of the judge. Daniela visited her every 2 days to rehearse, correct, strengthen her testimony. "You have to speak like a mother, Laura," she repeated, "because that's what you are. And that's what they have to see, that you're not a threat. You're not a burden. You're a mother who came to protect her son." Laura nodded. Inside, her son's voice kept repeating in her memory like a mantra. "Mom, are you going to always take care of me?" Meanwhile, Miguel remained at the shelter in Las Cruces. Authorities didn't allow contact with his mother. No calls, no letters. Daniela had tried to get a special permit, unsuccessfully. The child was under state custody, labeled as an unaccompanied minor, although everyone knew that was a lie. He wasn't alone. He had been torn away. A psychologist from the Children's Center, contacted by Tomás, agreed to share some observations under condition of confidentiality. Her email said, "The child shows symptoms of severe anxiety. He sleeps little, has constant nightmares, refuses to participate in group activities. He only draws. In all his drawings appears a female figure with long hair, always crying or with open arms. In some, the child is behind a fence or a closed door." Laura heard this with a lump in her throat. "He thinks I abandoned him," she said with a broken voice. "He believes I left him there because I didn't love him anymore." Daniela squeezed her hand tightly. "Then let him know you're fighting, that you haven't stopped fighting for him for a single day." The hearing would take place in a small room at the immigration court in El Paso, Texas. It wasn't a luxurious courtroom. The walls were beige, the chairs plastic, the air conditioning sounded like an old tractor. But for Laura, that room represented everything, the last chance to recover her son. When she entered wearing the beige detainee uniform, the judge was already in his place, an older man with a stern but tired face. He had seen hundreds of cases like hers, dozens of mothers crying, fathers pleading, separated children. Sometimes his power was limited, but other times a story managed to pierce through the walls of law. Laura sat next to Tomás, in front of her immigration prosecution, ready to challenge every word. Daniela was at the back of the room as a witness. The judge looked directly at her. "Mrs. Laura Contreras, you have the floor." Laura took a deep breath and spoke. She spoke with the voice of all fleeing mothers. She told from the beginning, the threat, the desert, the moment she thought her son would die in her arms. She described the exact instant they separated him from her, his cry, his gaze, the subsequent emptiness. She told what she had signed without understanding, what they took from her without explaining. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just spoke with a firm and clear voice, like someone who no longer fears the truth. "I crossed that border because I had no choice, and if I had to do it again, I would. Not to seek money, not to cause harm. I did it so my son wouldn't end up dead in the street like his father. I did it to give him a chance to live." The judge listened without interrupting. At one point, he looked away and stared at his own hands. When Laura finished, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. You could only hear the tick-tock of an old clock hanging on the wall. Then, Tomás presented Miguel's drawings, the ones the shelter psychologist had sent. He placed them on the judge's table without saying a word. The man looked at them, one by one. In one, Miguel had drawn a figure behind a fence, with tears. In another, a woman held a child, both with broken hearts. The judge breathed deeply. He rubbed his forehead. "Were these drawings made at the shelter?" "Yes, Your Honor," Tomás replied, without contact with the mother, without knowing they were being used as evidence. The prosecutor said nothing. The judge remained silent for a few more seconds, and then closed the file with a sharp blow. "I'm going to issue an order for immediate suspension of deportation. Additionally, I demand an urgent review of the minor's custody case. This family has been victims of unjust separation. I cannot give them back the lost time, but at least I can prevent further harm. Laura didn't understand immediately. She remained silent, as if the words hadn't yet reached her heart. It was Daniela who hugged her first, then Tomas. Then yes, the tears came out, like a river contained for weeks, months. Laura cried for fear, for helplessness, for injustice, but above all, for hope. "Will I see him?" she asked through sobs. "Very soon," Tomas said. "We're going to request immediate reunification." Daniela was already making calls as they left the courthouse. Laura stopped at the entrance, looked up at the cloudy El Paso sky, and for the first time since crossing the border, she took a deep breath without guilt. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt she wasn't losing it. At the Las Cruces shelter, Miguel had stopped talking. It wasn't from one day to the next. At first, he only responded in monosyllables. Then, he simply lowered his head and avoided eye contact. He no longer laughed. He didn't play. He ate just enough not to faint. He slept little. He woke with starts. Sometimes he screamed in his sleep, sometimes not even that. The place's psychologist, a woman named Rebecca Ortiz, had tried everything: games, drawings, play therapy, even group sessions with other children. But Miguel remained locked inside himself, as if he had closed a door from within and thrown away the key. "Do you like soccer?" she asked him one afternoon, while he drew silently. Miguel didn't answer. "Would you like to see your mom again?" This time, Miguel looked up, very slowly, and looked at her with empty eyes. "She doesn't love me anymore." Rebecca felt something break inside her. "Why do you say that?" "Because she left me here." The woman took a breath, holding back. "Miguel, your mom didn't leave you. She's looking for you. She's fighting for you." The boy lowered his gaze again. "That's what everyone says." That was the deepest damage, the invisible wound, the abandonment that wasn't real, but felt as if it were. Rebecca knew words weren't enough. Miguel needed proof. He needed to see his mother again, touch her, hug her, feel that he hadn't dreamed it all. Meanwhile, in El Paso, Laura was in a shelter run by an NGO. She wasn't free yet. She was under immigration supervision. She couldn't leave the state. But she was no longer in a cell. She had a small room, a single bed, access to a common kitchen, and the right to use a phone once a day. The first call was to her sister in Mexico. They cried together. The second was to Daniela. The third to Tomas. "When can I see Miguel?" she asked with a tense voice. "We're working on that," Tomas said. "But the system is slow. We have to send an official family reunification request, and that can take days or weeks." "I don't have weeks, Tomas. He's suffering. He's alone." "I know. Believe me, I know." Daniela, for her part, moved heaven and earth to speed up the process. She sent letters to shelter authorities. She gathered testimonies, psychological evaluations, proof of identity. Everything that demonstrated Laura was his mother, that she had never given up on him, that they had been illegally separated. One afternoon, she received a response by email. The subject line read, "Miguel Contreras case, possible reunification." She opened it trembling. "We authorize supervised visit from mother to minor under reunification protocol. Date, next judicial hearing. Location, El Paso Courthouse. Minor will be transferred with accompanying shelter staff and designated social worker." Daniela ran to the shelter. Laura saw her enter and knew something had changed. "What happened?" Daniela smiled at her for the first time in days. "You're going to see your son, Laura, in 3 days at the hearing." Laura covered her mouth with her hands. She sat down, then stood up. She walked around the room not knowing what to do. She cried. She laughed. She cried again. "Is he okay? Is he really okay? He's holding on, but he needs to see you more than ever." During the following days, Laura could barely sleep. She prepared as if she were going to reunite with life itself. She bought, with help from the NGO, a clean shirt and used shoes. She did her hair like she did when she took Miguel to school. She practiced what to say to him, how to hug him, how not to scare him, how not to cry too much. Finally, the day arrived. The hearing wasn't about her legal case. It was an administrative reunification procedure requested by her lawyer. But for Laura, it was the most important moment of her life. The courtroom was the same as the previous trial, but this time, the tension was different. There were shelter representatives, a social worker, a government official, Tomas, Daniela, and a different judge, a young woman with a serious but kind face. Transfer of the minor to the courthouse has been authorized, an officer informed. He will arrive shortly. Laura felt her heart was going to explode out of her mouth. Her hands were sweating. She couldn't sit still. She looked at the door every 10 seconds. And then it happened. The door opened and Miguel entered. He wore simple clothes, a small backpack hanging from one shoulder. He walked with timid steps, as if he didn't know where he was. His eyes scanned the room with fear, until they saw her, Laura, standing with trembling lips, extended hands, eyes full of tears. "Mommy!" Miguel screamed, dropping his backpack and running. Laura also ran. They met in the center of the room, and the hug they gave each other was so strong that they both trembled. They didn't speak, they just cried. Miguel hid his face in her neck. Laura pressed him against her chest as if she wanted to merge with him. Everyone present remained silent. The judge lowered her head. Daniela cried. Tomas's eyes were misty. The social worker accompanying Miguel discreetly wiped away a tear. "Forgive me, my love. Forgive me," Laura whispered over and over. "I never abandoned you. I was looking for you all this time. I love you. I love you with all my soul." Miguel said nothing, he just cried. But it wasn't a cry of fear, it was a cry of relief, of returning to the safe place, of coming home, even if it wasn't a place, but a person. That day, the court made no other decisions. It wasn't necessary. The scene spoke for itself, and for the first time, after so much pain, the silence no longer hurt. The reunion had been so impactful that even the cold walls of the courthouse seemed moved. But despite the emotion, no one forgot that this embrace didn't solve everything. It was just a crack of light in the middle of a storm that hadn't yet ended. Miguel and Laura reunited, yes, but they were still trapped in a legal process that guaranteed nothing. 2 days after the reunion, the definitive hearing was scheduled. This time, it wouldn't be a preliminary review or a suspension request. It would be the resolution of the complete case. Laura and Miguel's fate would be decided there. The courtroom was fuller than usual. Besides the judge, prosecutor, and lawyers, there were representatives from 2 NGOs, social worker Daniela, shelter psychologist Rebecca Ortiz, and some authorized journalists who had followed the case since it went viral. Everyone expected something: justice, reparation, or at least humanity. Laura arrived holding Miguel's hand. She had bathed him, combed his hair, dressed him in a blue t-shirt someone from the shelter had given him. She herself wore her hair up, a modest but clean blouse, and a face marked by anxiety but firm. The judge, a man of about 60, began the proceeding protocolally. He read the case background. He mentioned the forced signature, separation without judicial order, lack of translator, irregular immigration process. His words were technical, but his tone revealed a moral weight that went beyond the file. "The court has reviewed the evidence presented," he said without looking up. "The circumstances of this case indicate multiple institutional failures, but we need to hear all testimonies before making a final decision." First, Tomas spoke. The lawyer didn't stop at dramatics. He presented the facts one by one, clearly. The cartel threat, the desert crossing, voluntary surrender to the patrol, separation without order, signature without legal assistance. Then he showed Miguel's drawings again, along with the psychological report signed by Rebecca. Then he allowed a pause, looked at the judge and said in a low but firm voice, "Your Honor, we're not asking for favors. We're asking for justice. This woman and this child were victims of a policy that is being questioned throughout the country today. They didn't ask for privileges, they asked for protection, and they were paid with emotional torture. What this court decides today will not only affect their lives, but will send a message about what kind of country we are and what kind of country we want to be." The prosecutor asked for the floor. He didn't deny the errors, but he hid behind the procedures in force at the time. He said Laura crossed illegally, that she didn't present her application at an official entry point, that the system was overloaded, but his voice sounded empty, like someone repeating arguments no one fully believes anymore. Then the judge called Rebecca Ortiz. The psychologist sat with a folder in her hand. Her testimony was overwhelming. Miguel presented all the signs of trauma from forced separation. "In my years of work, I've seen many children suffer from violence, poverty, abandonment. But I've never seen anything as painful as a child who believes his mother left him when it was actually the system that took her away." She told how Miguel had stopped talking, how he barely ate, how his drawings were the only way to express the pain. She spoke of psychological damage, fear of abandonment, of nights when the child woke up screaming for his mother. "He doesn't need a legal report," she concluded. "He needs his mom." The judge nodded slowly, as if each word weighed more than the previous one. Finally, it was Laura's turn. She stood up, with Miguel by her side. The judge offered a chair for the child, but Miguel refused to let go of his mother's hand. So they remained like that, united, facing the bench. Laura breathed deeply. She had already told her story. She had already cried, screamed, pleaded. But now, with Miguel by her side, her words came from another place, from dignity. "I didn't come here to cause problems," she began. "I came because my country was no longer safe, because being a mother there meant watching your child die while still alive. And I crossed, yes, I crossed like many others, but I didn't cross alone. I brought my son with me, because separating from him was unthinkable until they tore him from my arms like an object." The room maintained absolute silence. Laura continued, "I've been called illegal. I've been treated like a criminal. But my only crime was wanting to save my son. And if that makes me guilty, I accept it, because I would do it 1,000 times if necessary." The judge lowered his gaze. He made notes in his book. Then he adjusted his glasses, breathed deeply, and spoke in a grave voice. "This court recognizes that Mrs. Laura Contreras was a victim of a flawed process and unjustified separation from her son. I acknowledge the damage caused, both physical and emotional, to both. Therefore, I issue the following resolution. A brutal silence settled. The deportation order is nullified. Temporary residence permit is granted while her asylum application is studied. Additionally, permanent reunification of the minor with his mother is ordered, without conditions. This family should not be separated again." The room exploded in contained tears. Laura hugged Miguel tightly. Daniela couldn't help crying softly. Tomas lowered his head with relief. Laura, still hugging her son, looked at the judge with drenched eyes. "Thank you." The judge looked into her eyes, finally, with an expression rarely seen in those rooms. "Respect. You did what any mother would have done," he said. "And that's not a crime. It's love." The echo of the verdict still floated in the air when the judge stood up and left the room. No one moved at first. It was as if we all needed to make sure we had heard correctly, that it was real, that Laura wouldn't be deported, that Miguel wouldn't be handed over to the system, that finally justice had appeared. Miguel, still holding his mother's hand, looked up. "Are we leaving together?" he asked in a low voice, as if afraid of the answer. Laura crouched in front of him, held him by his shoulders, and spoke to him, looking directly into his eyes. Yes, my love. No one will separate us again. We're leaving together, to home. And then something unexpected happened. The boy broke free, ran to the center of the room, and shouted with all his strength, "Mommy!" As if until that moment he hadn't believed it was true, as if he needed to say it loudly once more to confirm that the pain was over. Laura immediately approached, and Miguel jumped into her arms. The hug was long, tight, urgent. It wasn't just affection, it was the physical need to reconnect, to make sure the other was there, complete, real, alive. They both cried without shame, as if they were alone in the world. And in that instant, the courtroom ceased being a cold and legal place. It became an altar of humanity, an improvised sanctuary where all present, judge, lawyers, officials, journalists, activists, witnessed something that transcended the file, a reunion that seemed torn from a movie, but was painfully real. Daniela was the first to put her hands to her face. She cried silently. Tomas, with a face hardened by so many legal battles, couldn't prevent a tear from crossing his cheek. Even the prosecutor, who had maintained a firm stance throughout the process, lowered his gaze with tight lips, as if trying to swallow a lump. One of the reporters put his camera on the floor, respectfully. He understood that scene didn't need lenses or headlines. It was enough to record it in the heart. Miguel didn't let go of Laura. His thin little arms surrounded her neck desperately, as if he feared that, if he loosened his grip, she would disappear again. "I thought you didn't love me anymore," he said amid sobs. "Don't say that," Laura responded, caressing his face. "I never stopped looking for you. Every day, every minute I dreamed of you. You are my life, Miguelito." "I dreamed of you too," he whispered. "Every night." The shelter social worker approached carefully. "Mrs. Laura, the minor must leave today under your custody. We just need you to sign some documents." "I'll sign with blood, if necessary," she said without letting go of her son. They took her to an adjoining room where Daniela and Tomas helped her sign Miguel's official release from the system. The boy no longer had the status of unaccompanied minor. He had recovered his legal identity, and above all, the most important, he had recovered his mom. Outside the courthouse, the sun was beating down hard. It was one of those completely clear sky days, so bright it forced you to squint. Laura felt the heat on her skin, and for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of it. "Where are we going now?" Miguel asked, with a shy smile. "We're going home," she replied, not knowing exactly which place she meant. They had no house, no furniture, nothing material. But they were together, and that was enough for any place to be a home. Daniela took them in her car to the shelter where Laura was staying. Miguel was surprised to see other children running, other smiling faces, hot food on a table, clean beds. "Are we going to sleep here?" "Just for a few days," Laura explained. "Then we'll find something better." That night, Miguel slept for the first time in a bed without bars since he was separated. He went to bed hugging his mother, clinging to her arm. Laura didn't sleep. She stayed watching him breathe, in peace, in silence. And she cried, yes, but not from pain. She cried for everything she had survived, for what they had lost, but also for what they still had. The next morning, a shelter volunteer knocked on the bedroom door with a plastic bag. "Miguel, someone left this for you." It was his stuffed animal, the one Laura had given him before crossing the desert, the one that had stayed in his backpack when they separated him. Daniela had recovered it as part of the evidence. No one expected it to still exist, but there it was. Miguel took it with both hands, looked at it tenderly, and pressed it against his chest. "How did you know I was going to need it?" Laura knelt in front of him. "Because every mother knows what her child needs, even when she's not with him." In the following days, Tomas continued working so Laura's temporary permit would become definitive asylum. Daniela helped find a school for Miguel. The shelter included them in a transitional housing program. Everything moved forward, step by step. But for Laura, the most important thing was already done. She had recovered her son. She had defeated the system, the desert, the illegible forms, the cold officials. She had faced hell and come out of it. And in the midst of all that, she kept saying one phrase in a low voice, as if it were a prayer. "Thank you for holding on, son. Thank you for waiting for me." Life after the courthouse wasn't easy. No one offered them a red carpet. There was no house waiting for them, no guaranteed job, no magic hand erasing the past. What there was freedom. And that, for Laura and Miguel, was already a luxury not everyone could afford. They moved to a small apartment in Las Cruces, thanks to a temporary refugee support program. It was a studio apartment with a kitchenette, a double bed they shared, and a plastic table with 2 chairs. The walls were stained and the heater failed every so often. But it didn't matter. There were no bars there, no uniforms, no fear. Laura began working cleaning offices at night. She left when Miguel went to sleep and returned at dawn. She slept few hours, always with an exhausted body, but a willing soul. Every dollar she earned was another brick in that new life they were building with their fingernails, but with dignity. During the day, Miguel went to the neighborhood public school. At first, it was difficult for him. He didn't speak English well. He isolated himself in class, looked out the window more than at the blackboard. But there was a teacher, Miss Hernandez, who noticed him from the first day. "Your son is very quiet, but he understands everything," she told Laura at a meeting. "It's as if he's lived through many things that aren't for a child." Laura lowered her gaze. "He lived them." The teacher nodded, silently, respectfully. Since then, she took him under her care. Little by little, Miguel began raising his hand in class. He started reading aloud, writing stories, playing with other children at recess. "Today, my son told me he wants to be a teacher when he grows up," Laura told Daniela on the phone one night. "A few months ago, he didn't even want to talk. Now, he dreams." But not everything was perfect. Sometimes, Miguel woke up with nightmares. He called his mom with anguish. He remembered screams, lights, closed doors. He curled up in her chest and asked if someone would separate them again someday. "No one else, my love," she told him, stroking his hair. "Never again." Laura also had her moments. There were days when fatigue overcame her, when she cried silently while scrubbing other people's bathrooms, days when she doubted everything. But then she'd return home, find Miguel's drawings on the table, see him sleeping peacefully, and breathe deeply. She continued. The asylum application was still in process. Tomas kept them informed. Sometimes everything was delayed by paperwork, sometimes by simple system indifference, but they were no longer in immediate danger. They had temporary permits, valid documents, identification numbers. In the United States, that was worth gold. Daniela stayed in touch. She had become more than a social worker. She became part of the family. She visited them once a week. She brought them food, used clothes, books for Miguel. "You taught me more than I taught you," she told them one day. "You reminded me why I do this work." One afternoon, Tomas invited them to a university talk where he would speak about the case. It was a room full of law students. Laura hesitated. She didn't want to expose herself, but Miguel insisted. "I want to tell my story," he said, with a decided voice. "So other children don't go through the same thing." Laura looked at him with pride. He still had dark circles. He still clung to her when they crossed crowded streets. But he had recovered something the system couldn't destroy, his voice. In that talk, mother and son stood before an audience full of young faces. Laura spoke from the heart. Miguel showed one of his drawings, a child and his mom holding hands with a broken border between them. The room erupted in applause. After the event, a student approached Laura. "Thank you for not giving up. Your story made me decide what kind of lawyer I want to be." Laura didn't know what to say. She just smiled, and that smile said more than 1,000 speeches. Over time, they began to feel they belonged. Laura became friends with other migrant women in the neighborhood. Miguel joined a reading group at the local library. They learned to use coupons, recycle furniture, save every last cent. They didn't have much, but they had the most important thing: a second chance. One night, while washing dishes together, Miguel asked her, "Do you think we'll ever forget all this?" Laura dried her hands and looked into his eyes. "No, but I don't want to forget it. What we went through broke us, yes, but also made us stronger." "So, was it good to go through that?" Laura thought before answering. "No, my love. Nothing they did to us was good, but surviving it, that was miraculous." Miguel hugged her, with his head resting on her chest. "Thank you for not leaving me." "Thank you for waiting for me," she replied. That night, as they slept, Laura dreamed they were walking together down a bright street. No one was chasing them. No one was watching them. There were no walls, no closed doors, just her and her son, laughing, free, walking forward. And when she woke up, she knew hell was behind them. There were still scars, but also love, and that was more than enough. And if you like this story, you'll surely love the next one that appears on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and turn on notifications. Until next time.